A mountain man lived solo off the land, relying solely on himself, without respite. Every task carried weight. Eat or starve, mend or freeze, sharpen or dull. But what did it truly take to survive a full day in the wild? How did he cook, trap, tan, patch, clean, and endure day after day? The dark forest loomed heavily around him. The wind whispered through the pines, slowly pulling frost from the branches like breath escaping from a slumbering beast. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance. Inside, the cabin felt more like a cave than a home. The fire had long since dwindled to mere embers, a faint glow concealed beneath a layer of ash. The air wasn't sharp enough to bite, but it hung heavily, settling into the cracks and seeping through the moss-stuffed chinks. This kind of cold crouched in the corners. It didn't scream, it lingered. Beneath a tangle of buffalo hides, worn wool, and a faded Hudson's Bay blanket, the mountain man lay motionless. Not yet. He remained still, alert, breaths forming pale puffs in the chilly air. In the wilderness, you don't spring up without good reason. Instead, you attune yourself to the sounds, an owl's call, the rustle of a fox. Silence meant nothing moved except for the expansive dark. At last, he began to stir. Slowly, he swung one leg over the side of the cot, then the other. His feet met the hard-packed earth with a muted thud. The ground was perpetually cold. Clad in long johns and a flannel shirt soaked with years of sweat and smoke, he was acutely aware of his environment. His rifle lay within arm's reach from the cot, while his hatchet rested securely in the stump by the hearth. Everything in the cabin had its designated spot, each location justified by purpose. He grasped the lantern, an old tin fixture that barely flickered to life. The light illuminated only his boots. The deer-hide flap serving as a door fluttered in the breeze, allowing the sharp breath of pine and cold to invade the space. Crouching by the hearth, shoulders hunched, he exhaled lightly across the coals. There was no rush. Fire does not favor haste. He gathered pine shavings, bark curls, and twigs. Gradually, the coals caught, a spark igniting into flame, then light. Heat emanated gradually. Smoke climbed through the chimney gap. If the draft remained steady, it would escape. Otherwise, it threatened to descend and blacken the rafters, a common occurrence he had come to accept. You don't confront the cabin. You learn to coexist with it. The cabin was small, hardly larger than a freight wagon. It contained a single room, no windows, a low cot, and shelves nailed directly into log walls filled with essentials. Cornmeal, flour, dried apples, salt pork, jerked meat swathed in old rags, a couple of tin pots, a powder horn, a mold for casting round balls, and a squat iron kettle. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, sweat, and time. He warmed his hands by the fire, watching his breath rise in white clouds. His gaze shifted from the ceiling to the walls, and then to an empty space, his mind elsewhere. He was mentally retracing the trap lines from the previous day, the ones by the creek bend and the deadfall beyond the ridge. He could visualize them perfectly. Stakes, snares, bait lines. Had the bait frozen? Had the beavers migrated downstream? It was possible. The last freeze had thickened the ice, making it stable enough to walk on, or treacherous enough to fall through. It was hard to say. He reached for the water bladder and poured its contents into the kettle. If it hadn't frozen solid, it would warm up quickly. If it had, he'd need to chip it out in chunks. He surveyed his surroundings once more. Coffee was long gone, weeks in fact. Instead, he pulled out some sassafras bark from a pouch. The root brew wasn't luxurious, but it was hot and offered a comforting burn as it slid down his throat. With a crack of his shoulders, he made a thorough check of the cabin. The flint fit snugly in the lock, the powder horn was sealed tight, and his knife gleamed sharp. His gloves were dry. He laced up his boots and buckled his belt, continuing his thorough inspection. Horn spoon, patch knife, bag of lead, patching cloth. Everything was precisely where it should be. By the door, a strip of pemmican dangled like weathered leather. He cut off a piece and savored it slowly, using the same knife for all his tasks. An enveloping silence filled the room as he stared into the distance, contemplating the terrain. How far he would journey, what hazards to steer clear of, and where he might find signs of wildlife. Stepping outside, he didn't venture far, just enough to breathe in the invigorating air. The crusted snow crunched beneath his boots, and the trees loomed tall and still, their dark silhouettes standing vigil against the winter landscape. He stepped back into the biting chill, the air sharp enough to sting his skin. Moving cautiously, he took the familiar frozen path to the stream, where cold mist hovered above the water's surface. His traps lay half submerged, their iron jaws clamped open and waiting for a catch. One by one, he inspected them, heavy double-spring footholds anchored to saplings he had hammered into the riverbank days earlier. For bait, he used castoreum, the oily musk extracted from beaver glands and stored in carved wooden cups. The scent was unpleasant, but it sure was effective. If you're interested in learning more about the traps used by mountain men, we've got an entire episode dedicated to each type. We also dive deep into hunting methods, covering how they tracked, stalked, and captured game in the wild. Check those out if you haven't already. Now, back to our story. After thoroughly checking his traps, the mountain man crouched down, his hands wet as he reset a sprung trap. He stepped into the water, disguising his scent and washing himself from the land. Beavers were clever. A whiff of the wrong thing, and they would vanish. Before leaving, he splashed water over his footprints. A small tactic, but it helped him remain unseen. Back at the cabin, smoke wafted from the chimney like a fading breath as the world began to awaken. A loon called from somewhere beyond the trees, and leaves rustled with hidden movement. Another day had begun. He surveyed a trail winding between roots and stones, slick with dew alongside the stream. Nothing had changed, but it was no time to lose concentration. The reassuring weight of his knife, tomahawk, and musket kept him grounded. At the water's edge, he crouched, listening. The water whispered by, a fish leapt, and a frog splashed. Yet he looked for other signs. Shaved stumps, chewed saplings, and slick slide marks in the mud. The beavers had certainly been active. Good news. He leaned in, setting the trap again. No movement, no catch. He frowned briefly, then reset the brush to enhance cover. With that done, he moved on. The next trap was near a thicket of willows, close to a lodge. The mud held fresh, webbed tracks. He knelt down and found the chain tight. Something was struggling below. He pulled it up slowly, water streaming off dark fur. The beaver thrashed feebly, nearly spent. Then, with a single swift strike, the fight ended. The mountain man offered a whispered thanks, sincere and not just for show. He inspected the pelt, thick and prime, sure to fetch a good price back east. After resetting the trap, camouflaging it with mud and twigs, he added more castoreum as a lure. With the beaver secured to his pack, he continued down the line. Some traps yielded catches, while others remained empty. He worked with purpose as the sun climbed higher, warming the chill from his coat. Birds chirped in the trees, and squirrels dashed through the branches. Life was all around him, bustling beneath the quiet surface. He didn't need to speak. The land communicated in its own ways. You just needed to listen. With traps behind him and a beaver draped heavily over his shoulder, he turned back toward the cabin. The weight pressed against him, but he welcomed it. What mattered was that one more task was completed, one more part of the daily grind. Outside the cabin, he hoisted the beaver onto a low branch, where the cool air would preserve it until he was ready to skin it. There was no hurry. Skinning required calm hands and a sharp knife. Sloppiness would only lead to a ruined pelt, and waste was simply not an option. He picked up the bucket at the cabin's entrance and made his way to the stream once more. As he reached the bank, he plunged the bucket into the water, filling it smoothly with a single motion. The cold bit at his fingers, but he paid it no mind. Upon entering the cabin, which was quiet and dim, he noticed the soft light filtering through the gaps in the logs. Setting the bucket down by the hearth, where the last embers glimmered, he retrieved his prized whetstone, a piece of novaculite, hard and clean. A trapper of his caliber knew the importance of maintaining a sharp blade. He settled down, placing the knife with its smooth bone handle across his lap. After wetting the stone thoroughly, he drew the blade back and forth in steady strokes. A soft hiss filled the air. Satisfied with his work, he tested the edge against his forearm, and a patch of hair came away cleanly. Good enough. He stood up and grabbed a broom made from bundled twigs, sweeping away dust, ashes, and scraps. His tools were returned to their rightful places. Hides were stacked, and his rifle was inspected. Everything had its own spot. With the cabin in order, he added a few logs to the hearth. The flames caught, and warmth slowly spread through the room. Having done what needed to be done, he relaxed in front of the fire. There was no need for words. The gentle crackling mingled with the sounds of nature outside. There was plenty left to accomplish, but for the moment, he let the warmth envelop him. The day was still young. By noon, he had successfully checked his morning traps, netting a beaver, a fox, and 2 muskrats. Clean kills. Carrying them back was second nature, the familiar weight resting comfortably on his shoulders. Outside the cabin, he readied himself for the task of skinning. Knife in hand, he began with the beaver, one swift cut from tail to lip, maintaining a neat, straight line. He carefully peeled the hide away, taking his time with the blade. The underfur gleamed, a sign of its value. A careless miscut could be costly. He rolled the carcass, maneuvering the edge expertly, finishing the job cleanly. Next came the muskrats, followed by the fox. The smaller game required a different technique. He strung each one up by the hind legs, cut around the ankles, and pulled the skin down as if peeling off a sock. It demanded strength. The delicate skins required precision, as even a small tear could render them worthless. He laid each pelt across wooden frames, securing them tightly with rawhide. Propping the frames against the cabin wall, he angled them just so to catch both sun and breeze. Smoothing out any creases, he checked for tears, ensuring nothing sagged. Those pelts were vital to his livelihood, the reason he toiled in this harsh land. Nothing went to waste. Later, he'd butcher the remaining meat. The beaver tail, especially rich and fatty, would be set aside for a special meal. But first, the hides required his full attention. He cut a slender willow branch, bending it into a hoop and tying it with sinew. This frame would evenly stretch the beaver hide. Working methodically, he laid the pelt fur down over the hoop. With a bone awl, He punched holes around the edge. Steady hand, even spacing, no room for error. Afterward, he threaded rawhide strips through each hole, pulling them tight to keep the hide flat against the frame. No slack, no wrinkles. An uneven stretch would lead to rot. Once secured, he leaned the hoop against the cabin wall, angled to catch sun and breeze. He repeated this process for the muskrat and fox pelts, one pelt for each frame. Running his hands over them, he sought out folds or pulls, adjusting the tension as needed. The drying process would take several days, demanding constant attention. One careless day, and a pelt could go to waste. With the hides taken care of, he shifted his focus to the meat. The beaver tail, a fatty delicacy, deserved special attention. He cleaned it meticulously, removing the scaly skin and scrubbing away the musk before soaking it overnight in a brine of salt and vinegar. Once properly infused, it would cook up beautifully. Tomorrow, he planned to simmer it slowly with baking soda to tenderize the flesh, then pan-fry it in butter, mustard, and a splash of wine, a rare treat on the frontier. Next, he turned to the lean cuts from the beaver, muskrat, and fox, which required preservation. He sorted through the meat, trimming it and setting aside the portions he'd eat right away. The rest needed to be smoked. His smokehouse, a sturdy log hut sealed with mud to retain heat, was ready for the task. Inside, he hung strips of meat from wooden beams, spacing them apart for optimal airflow. After lighting the pit, he added hickory and applewood to the flames. A gentle stream of smoke began to rise, enveloping the meat in a rich, savory aroma. This fire would smolder for days, preserving and enhancing the flavor of every piece. The day was still young, and much work awaited him. The afternoon would bring its own set of tasks, maintaining the relentless rhythm of survival in the wild. The sun hung low in the sky, slicing through the pine and aspen with a harsh golden glow. Somewhere amid the trees, a bird called once and then fell silent. The mountain man soon spotted some game nearby and decided to embark on a quick hunt, intending to return before sunset. He took a moment to absorb the vastness of the forest, the rich layers of green, the patchy browns, the unending wilderness. With the sun indicating he had plenty of time, he set his sights on a familiar game trail, worn into the ground by the routine of hooves. The path narrowed quickly. Laurel and choke cherry bushes leaned in, their branches reaching out like claws. He ducked low, moving quietly on the balls of his feet, avoiding any heavy footsteps. His breath was calm, drawn deeply through his nose as he took in the scents of pine, damp moss, decay, and a faint animal musk in the air. Recent, unmistakable. He froze, dropping into a crouch, not thinking but instinctively knowing. His eyes scanned the forest floor. There it was, beneath a fern, a small, sharp print, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. He lowered himself further, his hand hovering just above the imprint. Cloven and wide set. Definitely a whitetail, likely a doe. Perhaps not alone. He didn't need to estimate how fresh the tracks were. He could sense it. The edges were soft, still moist. No signs of crumble. The pine needles hadn't shifted yet. She had run, not walked. He moved again, half rising, eyes glancing to the left. The tree line seemed to hold its breath. The tracks angled towards the south-southeast, descending into a gentle draw. A wise choice. Plenty of cover and an easy slope with the wind at her back. But the wind was unpredictable, swirling among the trees. An advantage for him. She wouldn't catch his scent unless it shifted, so he pressed on, this time more cautiously. Cradling his rifle instead of having it slung over his shoulder, he used his left hand to clear away the bramble. Every 10 steps, stop, listen. There's always some squirrel chattering or a jay screeching. But when the woods fall silent, that's when it counts. Then he spotted a sign, birch bark scraped away, not just grazed but chewed, a series of thin, vertical grooves made by deer teeth. The sap was still fresh. She had been feeding. She still wasn't spooked. She was close. The mountain man crouched low, pressing his palm into a disturbed patch of the trail as he brought his fingers to his nose. A strong, bitter scent lingered. She must have bedded here, maybe just an hour ago, likely heading toward water. Suddenly he chose to veer off the main path. No direct pursuit. He recalled the wise words of a trapper. Don't follow the deer. Flank where it went. With that in mind, he arced wide, moving higher in elevation. The incline gave him a view down the draw. The wind kissed his face. Perfect conditions. Then he halted, sensing movement. It was barely noticeable, a flicker behind the young aspen trees. With a steady hand, he raised his rifle, smoothly and silently, driven by instinct, not the doe. A yearling stood before him, all jittery limbs and twitching ears, its velvet muzzle working at the moss-crusted log. Though its muscles were taut, ready to spring, it browsed calmly, unaware. The hunter's breath stilled in his chest. His finger hovered above the trigger. Hold. The mother would be close, might double back through this draw. He became stone, his eyes mapping every shifting shadow, every quiver in the understory. Then movement, not ahead, but to the east. Ravaged foliage, broken stems, deep splayed prints that spoke of weight. Different quarry altogether. He sank to one knee, examining the browse line, teeth marks scoring bark 6 feet up. No whitetail could reach that high. Elk, and fresh. Decision made without conscious thought. He pivoted soundlessly, following this new promise of meat. The mountainside turned treacherous. Brambles clutched at his leggings like beggars' hands. Ferns lashed his thighs with wet scorn. The very earth conspired against him. Loose scree shifting underfoot, gnarled roots rising to trip him. He moved with deliberate silence, placing each step as carefully as a chess move, deaf to the forest's chatter, the gossip of jays, the sighing pines, the endless rustling commentary of leaves. Only the clues mattered now. That freshly broken twig oozing sap, the tuft of tawny hair caught on rough bark, the musky tang cutting through the pine-scented air. The message was clear. Close now, very close. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in fragmented gold. He climbed steadily until breakthrough. The trees surrendered to a narrow ridgeline trail. As his moccasin touched the packed earth, his body became pure tension, coiled, hyper-aware. Then the wind shifted, and with it came the scent. Warm, animal, immediate. The bull elk stood like a monarch behind the brush screen, its polished antlers catching the last golden light as it grazed undisturbed. With practiced patience, the mountain man raised his hawken rifle, settling the sights with deliberate care. Breath stilled, finger poised, then betrayal. A shifting wind carried his scent. The elk's head jerked up, nostrils flaring as its ears swiveled toward danger. For one frozen heartbeat, their eyes met through the foliage. Crack! The forest erupted as the bull vanished in a thunder of snapping branches. The hunter didn't give chase. He simply lowered his rifle exhaled slowly through his nose, and listened. The hunt hadn't ended. It had transformed. Retracing his path with silent steps, his sharp eyes scanned for fresh sign. The dense timber suddenly opened into a sunlit clearing, the meadow grass glowing amber in the late afternoon light. He became shadow itself, moccasins brushing the earth like whispers as he slipped behind a fallen log to wait. The herd materialized from the trees, first the watchful cows, then the bull emerging last, its massive shoulders and regal antlers moving through the sea of grass. The hawken found its anchor. One controlled breath, silence. Then, boom! The shot echoed through the valley. The bull staggered, its powerful legs folding gracefully before collapsing. As the herd scattered, the hunter remained motionless, listening intently before approaching his prize. Kneeling beside the fallen giant, he paid his respects. This meat would sustain him. This hide would ward off winter's bite. His green river knife flashed in the fading light as he began the sacred ritual of butchering, from sternum to throat. One fluid, practiced motion. No wasted movement. His skilled hands worked methodically, separating hide from muscle with precision born of necessity. Steam rose from the warm carcass as the pelt peeled away in crimson sheets, carefully set aside for tanning. The chest cavity yielded its treasures, liver and heart wrapped in clean muslin, while the rest would serve as bait for other forest dwellers. Prime cuts, shoulders, hindquarters, back straps were meticulously removed, trimmed, and packed into the parfleche. The rawhide container demanded perfect balance lest its weight tear his shoulders on the trek home. Bones and offal remained, nature's offering to the scavengers. Foxes, ravens, perhaps even a bear would feast tonight beneath the stars. Shouldering his heavy burden, he paused to survey the clearing. The forest blazed with autumn's fire as his moccasins left faint impressions in the rain-softened earth. His foraging eyes spotted a cluster of serviceberries, plump blue jewels bursting with tart sweetness. He harvested sparingly, recalling Blackfoot recipes that combined them with fat and dried meat, precious winter provisions. This ancient knowledge lived through hands that still practiced it. Further along, his nose led him to wild onions, their pungent aroma cutting through the woodland scents. At the meadow's edge, he carefully excavated the bulbs, gathering just enough to flavor stews or combat fever. These weren't his discoveries, but legacies passed down through generations of wilderness dwellers. The cabin welcomed him as twilight deepened. Door barred, gear stowed, he began the evening rituals, berries spread to dry, onions rinsed and diced. While the beaver tail awaited tomorrow's preparation, the elk demanded immediate attention, some for drying, some for smoking, some for tonight's humble stew. A simple meal took form in the blackened pot, wild onions, a handful of berries, and fresh elk simmering together. The rich aroma mingled with wood smoke as he turned to his weapons. His hawken, that trusted .50 caliber companion, received reverent care. A bare-oiled patch smoothed the bore. The lock mechanism clicked clean, the flash channel cleared with a brass pick. His older flintlock received equal attention. Frizzen polished, touch hole cleared, flint sharpened to a keen edge. Only then did he tend to his own wounds. Bear grease and balsam sap stung his cracked knuckles, the pungent salve keeping infection at bay. A glance confirmed the woodpile stood ample, yesterday's foresight paying dividends tonight. At last, he settled by the fire, stew bowl in hand. The tender meat, caramelized onions, and berries reduced to a tangy glaze made each spoonful a reward for the day's labor. Cherry bark tea cut through his fatigue, its bitterness a small price for warmth and cleansing. Outside, the night chorus began. Insects buzzing, an owl's distant query, the wind sighing through pines. A coyote's lament rose and fell in the darkness. He listened without looking, understanding these sounds not as music, but as vital intelligence. In this world, peace never meant rest. Silence was simply nature holding its breath before the next challenge. With rifles cleaned, body tended, and larder stocked, the mountain man leaned back against the rough-hewn logs, firelight dancing in his watchful eyes. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now there was only this moment, the crackling hearth, the weight of his weapons within reach, and the endless whisper of the wild beyond his door.